See, Aggie Pride.
Yeah, that's one of them trash schools over there in North
Whatever.
Carolina. I went to the illustrious Maryland Eastern Shore.
Anyway,
Okay. Yeah. I did my undergraduate work at Alabama State, so I'm in the SWAC. Yeah. Y'all in the MEAC, right?
Yeah, I got your whole profile up that I'm
yeah.
gonna read.
That's
Oh,
what's
you
up.
ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Yeah, I gotta make sure I'm set so I can get my viewers know the questions to come up because they gonna ask a lot of crazy questions.
I'm sure.
They crazy like that, but I love them though. What they do. All right, so all right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Amsterdam Talk. I be your host, Rod. Today, I got a special guest in the building, all the way from the University of Louisville, where he's currently teaching, Dr. Armon Perry. How you doing, Dr. Perry?
Good. How about you, Rob?
I'm doing great. I am doing swell. But before we start, I want to actually give them a background on you that I also host Family Feud for this network, and the
Okay.
defending champs are Hornets,
There you
Alabama
go.
State University. I
There
see
you
that you graduated with a BSW from Alabama State in 2001.
go. Absolutely.
Also, then you went to the champions that won last night.
There you, there you go. The tide
Ro-
rolls again.
Roll Tide, and you got your PhD from there as well. So you're definitely well established. I see my brother as always. You know, it's good to see good brothers. I have another brother that a very, very, very close friend of mine who has a PhD in criminal justice who teach at Lincoln University. He sent me something. There's a conference down in New Orleans in February. I can't remember the name of the conference, but we're not going to hold up. We just going to dive, right into it. You got other publications before we get to the publication that I read. You have other publications such as You Ain't Denzel. Tell me about that.
Right.
I saw that on top, like You Ain't Denzel. And I know a lot of women, they, admire Denzel a lot, but you said You Ain't Denzel in one of your publications.
Yeah, so here's the story behind that. So let me back up and say that most of my research revolves around two areas. One, I have an arm of my research that revolves around fathers and their involvement with their children. So that's my bread and butter, my fatherhood work. But
Okay.
then, as a function of that, when we start talking about the fatherhood piece, like you really can't talk about fatherhood unless you're talking about co-parenting, unless you're talking about relationships, because those are the main vehicles or pathways that guys use to take active roles in their kids' lives, right? And
Yes.
so, as
Yes.
a consequence of that, I started to do sort of some spin-off work around relationships. And so, I think the piece that you read is connected to some of my relationship work. And the what's interesting is the You Ain't No Denzel piece is actually a study, one of the preliminary studies on a preliminary article that came out of a study that I did that examined Black men's attitudes towards marriage. And so what happened was we were collecting all of this data, and I'm sitting around doing some coding and some analysis with a couple of colleagues of mine, and we're reading through the transcripts, and this one brother said in one of the transcripts, what happened was the guy was talking to a friend of his, and his friend was talking to him about sort of considering cheating on his wife or having an affair. And so when the guy that I was interviewing, he said that he asked his friend, he said, well, why? And so the guy says that, well, his wife had sort of let herself go from a physical standpoint, and the spice just wasn't there the way that it was in days gone by, whatever. And so the guy was interviewing, so he looked at his friend and said his friend was, kind of pudgy, and there was a little bit more on him than there was in days past. And he was old and had some health problems. And he said to him, well, you ain't no effing Denzel either. Right. Right. And so anyway, so we
You
were
you
reading
can
over.
you can curse Dr. Bird. You can
Okay,
curse. It's
I
fine.
didn't,
You
I
can
didn't,
curse. You can curse. You can curse. You
I
can
didn't know if
curse.
this was a family show or not, so I wanted to keep it PG until I got the green light.
You got the green light. You got the
Okay.
green light, brother.
I don't want the FCC showing up on your doorstep or mine either, right?
Well, I got a minor in. I mean, I got my undergrad is in communication. I know what the FCC do, but we're good on this one.
For sure. So in that
This is
case,
HBO. This
there
is
you go.
HBO.
My man. So yeah, so in that case, yeah, the guy says, well, yeah. He says to his friend, well, you ain't no fucking Denzel either, right? And so when we saw that line in the transcript, like, oh no, that's fine, we got to use that. And so anyway, so we use that as a title of an article that was about the ways in which, in this case, Black men tend to use pop culture as a way to narrate their stories and their lives, right? Because they were talking about things in ways that, in the discussion, the conversation with me as the interviewer, they were using language and references from pop culture, whether it be music, whether it be books, whether it be film, whether it be TV, to sort of draw parallels between their lives and the characters in various TV shows or movies or hip hop artists and so on and so forth. And so when the guy said, "You ain't no fucking Denzel," he was basically saying, I mean, Denzel, from the sort of Black experience, is the universal standard for a male sex symbol, right? And so,
Right.
in saying that his friend wasn't Denzel, he was basically saying, no, you're talking about your wife having let herself go. Well, the same can be said for you. And he used it as a way to sort of admonish his friend for even giving thought to the idea of cheating on his wife. So anyway, so that's the story behind that piece right there.
So that piece right there in itself, where as though you're not Denzel, where his wife let himself go, but himself wasn't in shape himself, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever the case may be. You know, she wasn't no Halle Berry, he wasn't no Denzel. Basically, let's just put it to, to the high standard, African Americans that we look at when we look at movies,
Sure.
so
I was
that
gonna
they
go
weren't.
Sanaa. I was gonna go Sanaa Lathan, but yeah, we can go with Halle Berry though.
Well, I got a good buddy that loves Sanaa Lathan to death, but I'm just saying, when we look at those situations, though, so what happens in those relationships where one person is not active enough to get them letting themselves go, they keeping themselves right, and the other person just letting themselves go. So what happens then?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I mean, that's a really good question, right? And so let me also back up and say, like, I don't pretend to be like a relationship guru. You know what I mean? My thing is, I'm a researcher, so I gather data, I analyze data, and then my job as a community engaged researcher is to share it with the people, right? So that people
Right.
can use it in terms of whether it be interventions in and around the community or in spaces like this where we can engage discussions with the masses and whatnot. So like I'm not a relationship expert from a clinical standpoint. That's not the nature of my work. But
I understand
what
that.
what I will say though is that I think the conclusions from my work would suggest that in situations like that, ideally any relationship, whether it be a romantic relationship, whether it be a friendship, whether it be a business relationship, by definition, there's give and take. There's pro and con. There's ebb and flow. There's reciprocity, right? And so there ought to be some partnership. And so if you find yourself in that sort of a situation, I think if you're the person who may be in a little bit better shape, or you may have a little bit more commitment to whether it be your physical health or even mental health or spiritual health or whatever the case may be, financial health, it would seem to me that if you had a partner, you would want to reach out and extend the olive branch to your partner and say, hey, in a loving and encouraging and supportive way, what are your goals around whatever this issue is? How can I be helpful in facilitating that process and helping to bring you along, right? So we can sort of walk this road together as opposed to separately or independently. To me, I think that's the most prudent approach in a situation like that.
Yeah, and that's beautiful. Since you said what you just said, that you're not an expert on relationships, you just do with the data. So we're gonna dive into what I actually read, and we're gonna break this down for the singles group, where you spoke about, basically the reality of Black men is very different than what you normally see on TV. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you spent years, talking about it, and one of your first lines that you said after the conversation is in the second paragraph is, there's a problem because too many people cannot distinguish what they see on screen versus reality. And I think that is one of the biggest failures in African American relationships, because we see the Love and Hip Hops, the Love and Hip Hop New York, the Potomac housewives, the Atlanta housewives, the LA housewives, uh Jay-Z and Beyonce, Cardi B and Offset. It's probably an old relationship because I'm out tuning pop culture. Nicki Minaj and Meek Mill. We see things in that nature, and they want to emulate that.
Mm-hmm.
So what becomes the issue? Because what you said is sensationalized to attract public attention, which is troubling. And even one of the good president, Barack Obama and Michelle. And what I took from your line was, it's troubling because what we see as a persona on TV, we don't know what's really going on in house.
Exactly. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you use the word persona, right? So by definition, a persona is in many ways an exaggerated and sort of sensationalized or hyperbolic version of an actual authentic person. And when we're talking about what I perceive to be a preoccupation with celebrity culture with and among specifically Black people, as you mentioned, I've always found that troubling, right? So in a lot of ways, like I liken it to back in the days when Christopher Reeve played Superman, right? Like you wouldn't walk out of the movie theater having seen that and say, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna put on some blue tights. I'm gonna jump off this building thinking I can fly over the next one just because I watched this on the movie screen, right? And so similarly, why is it that we would sort of absorb or consume whatever it is we see in celebrity culture from a relationship standpoint, and then use that as a model for our own relationships, given the vast and distinct differences between whatever our lived experiences are and those of the people that we see on screen, particularly given that, again, by definition, their job is to manufacture a persona, which is one that is used to draw us in based on the hyperbolic, based on the over the top, or as the young people would say, based on being extra, right? That's a part of the job description, right? So we ought to be mindful of that and take those things into consideration when we see them or view them as models of what people, I don't know if people still say relationship goals or whatever the case may be, right? But again, I think that a much more prudent approach would be to identify real regular people in and around our communities to model our relationships after. If we have people who we know, whether they be people in our circles of influence, people who we're connected to in our families of origin, maybe some elders at the church, elders in the community, people who've been together and their relationship have stood the test of time. What is it that these people are doing, right? As opposed to whomever it is we see with the most likes and the followers on IG or whatever the case may be. The other day I saw, I think it was, and I don't know her name, I think it's Gucci Mane's wife. And
I can't remember her name either, but I know you're talking about light-skinned, slim lady. Yes, I know you're talking about.
Maybe Keisha something. I think it starts with a K. But anyway, I saw where it was posted to, must have been Instagram or Twitter, whatever the case may be, where I think they recently had a child. So congratulations to them. That's a wonderful and beautiful thing. I should also say, let me step back and say that when I say this, again, I don't mean this as a criticism, because I think that even if you look at what we're shown from Gucci Mane, it seems that he's made a dramatic and drastic evolution from.
Yeah, he had a whole 360. He did a whole 360.
Yeah. And so Muhammad Ali said that the man who was the same at 50 as he was at 20 has only wasted 30 years of his life, right? And so it seems as though Gucci is making some changes in a positive. So again, shout out to him for doing that. And I would imagine that his relationship with his wife is probably a big part of that. So again, so when I say this, I don't mean this as a pejorative. I'm not casting any aspersions on them. But the other day I saw on Instagram where it was posted that he gave her $1 million for giving birth to their child. Right. And 200, 300, 400,000 likes and people commenting left and right. And I'm thinking, cool. Glad both mother and child appear to be safe and healthy. Why does the world need to know that? Right? And what is it that we get out of knowing that? Right? What do we do with that information? You see what I mean? So again, it's just sort of the hyperbolic, the over sensationalized that is sometimes troubling. We sometimes see on social media where so and so was gifted.
Well, I don't want to cut you off, but we're in the same. I don't want to cut you off, but we're in the same realm, like you said. He gave her $1 million to have the baby. Same when Offset cheated, he gave Cardi a Bentley for her birthday. Or rest in peace, the late great Kobe Bryant with that ring that he showed up.
We saw the press conference, right? Yeah,
Right. We saw the press conference.
yeah. And again, let me also say one of the reasons why I say I'm not a relationship expert is because again, I don't pretend to be any closer to perfect than anybody else. But to your point, though, I think that in those situations, in those circumstances, what gets people attention is the Bentley truck or the 8 carat ring. What about the transgression that precipitated or necessitated that purchase? You know what I mean?
Right.
And what type of damage has that done to the relationship? And also, what does it mean? What does it signal? What does it signify if you can engage in that sort of behavior and then make it right as long as you can scratch the check and get the pink slip on the Bentley truck, right? What does that say about the value of the connection in a relationship? Has it been sort of commercialized or materialized in that way? And does that cheapen it? Again, we all have to make our own decisions about that. But more to the point, what does that mean for people who consume and absorb that and they are in a position to get a Bentley truck, right, or 8 carat ring?
Right. Right.
What does that say about what should take precedence and priority in a relationship? I'm a firm believer that there is no objective truth, right? If you like it, I love it. But I think for most
Hmm.
of us, many of us, we would say no. The priority for most of us ought not be the extent to which you can get your partner a Bentley truck after
Right.
having
Right.
whatever it is that you need to do in order to require that to get back on good terms.
Right. And that's the thing right there that nobody sees. What you just stated, and your soliloquy was that we don't understand the backstory in the in-house thing. We're gonna say in-house thing. What happened? We saw the Bentley truck. We saw, the 8 carat ring. We saw the $1 million for you having a child. We see all of this,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't know the steps you took between to get back where you needed to be. And I think, for us as African Americans, and I really don't want to sound racist or the next thing I'm getting ready to say, but it's going to sound it a little way. But I think when us as African Americans or people of color, Black people, um, therapy sometimes is needed. And I think when we look at therapy, we say therapy is only for the Caucasians, and we don't know if the people we just named, because personally, I think the 444 album from Jay-Z was his therapeutic outlet to say, hey, this is where I'm going at. I want to let y'all inside what happened inside the relationship. But me and Beyonce, we had a little bit of therapy and I'm getting things under control. So what's your take on that about African Americans not seeking the therapy as our counterparts do?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important point. So this is an area where again, so I'm a professor at the University of Louisville. I actually teach in a school of social work, right?
Right.
And so our school of social work is one of the few in the country that also has built into it a marriage and family therapy program. So these are
Okay.
areas that I can speak specifically to, right? And we know
Mm-hmm.
that with and among Black folks, the notion of service underutilization is a major issue. And so for the folks
Right.
out there listening, when we're talking service underutilization, we're talking about the idea that there is a service that is out there that can be accessed, but for whatever reason, people need resources, but they aren't seeking them out. And with Black
Mm-hmm.
people, there's a whole history of us being mistreated, pushed aside, oppressed, and marginalized by all of America's institutions, right? Including the health and mental health systems. And so there's good reasons for many of us to be skeptical and reluctant to seek these things out. But it's also the case that even to this day, there is a large amount of stigma attached to the notion of mental health treatment and mental health counseling, whether it be through licensed practical counselors or licensed clinical social workers or psychotherapists or whatever the case may be. The stigma is broad, is rampant. I find that troubling and problematic as well because I liken that to how silly and absurd it would be for me to fall and break my leg and then decide, well, I know my leg is broken, but I'm just going to push through, right? Rather than getting
Right.
up and going to the doctor who's trained as a professional to help me out and patch me up and get me on the road to recovery. Well, similarly, if we find ourselves struggling with our mental health, It is the case that many of us decide that we're just going to push through. But the honest truth is, you aren't able to push through, because when you're talking about mental health concerns, you're talking about changes in body chemistry, you're talking about imbalances in serotonin and things like this, and you can't push through that, right? And many of us have been socialized and trained to believe that seeking out professional assistance for these types of issues is a sign of weakness, and almost nothing can be further from the truth, right? A wise man said, never confuse being courageous with being foolish, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, so I think that at the point in time when we recognize that we are in need of assistance, we recognize that we aren't whole, we recognize that we need an independent third party, I think we would do ourselves a favor by seeking out professional help in many different arenas, obviously this being one. So, yeah, so I think in all of our circles of influence, for all of the people out there listening, in your circles of influence, let's do what we can do to reduce and eliminate the stigma around seeking out professional help from a mental health standpoint. And there are lots of resources out there, right? Even in the online space, we're seeing Talkspace, we're seeing there's NAMI, the National Alliance Against Mental Illness. If you check out their website, you can even find, they even have on their webpage, and it's NAMI.org, they have on their webpage links for you to be able to identify local providers in your local area, and also providers who have a specialization in culturally competent practice, right? Because one of the other things we sometimes, one of the other thing that keeps us from seeking out treatment is we, for some reason, believe that, like you said, sometimes we think erroneously that counseling or therapy is for white people.
Right.
First of all, that's foolishness. But then sometimes we are concerned, again, with good reason, in terms of the way in which we've been stigmatized and marginalized and mistreated by some of these institutions. So sometimes the concern is whether or not we believe the professional that we seek assistance from will know and understand the issues that are germane to us.
Yes.
And those are valid concerns, right? But organizations like NAMI have also gone the extra step to say, well, here is a list of culturally competent providers, people who you have reason to believe not only have training in the art and the science of doing therapy and counseling, but these are also people who have been trained to understand the lived experiences of, say, for instance, Black people. And so they can combine those two things to be able to frame their interventions in a way that hit home and touch on some of the issues that are more specific and unique to our community.
Yes. Because when I speak to brothers and I talk about, things that we normally don't do, and like therapy and things like that, I get two things that normally come up, and that is the Tuskegee experiment and Henrietta Lacks, Johns Hopkins, with that. And I get two things in that nature, and it's like, okay, well, they are great two examples that would happen, to our culture. But at the end of the day, some things that happen in our culture, we have to look at and say, okay, two things. One thing, one of the store clerks that in my life that told me, you get a negative review, you need 20 more positives to erase that one negative review. Absolutely. And I think just me coming through from a public administration standpoint is like the distrust from the government brings another situation from it. But that's a whole nother story. We could talk about that all day, Dr. Perry, but we're going to go back to your article. So, okay, your article basically tells me, some of the Black men, we're talking to my viewers who just tuned in late. We're talking about, difference from TV in real life with, the Black man in reality. And so Dr. Perry stated, there's verbal emergements because their financial struggles will not allow them to provide for wife and children. So that is one thing. And the culture is, and as a matter of fact, the crazy thing that I was watching the episode of Martin earlier, when he told Bookman, because they was at the poker table, he said, I want to marry her, but I'm in this apartment. My finances is not right. I'm not ready for this. But when he decided to propose to her, she told him, I'm not worried about your finances. I just want to be with you. And I think that's the clear statement, that one of the statements you made in it, that you saying that's for us, but from a man's perspective is that we don't want to do it because we think we need the big house,
Sure.
the great job. We need to provide for you. And don't let the internet or social media creep in and say that the man needs to pay 100%, because for some reluctancy, 50-50 is damn near banished. That's like, you need to bear him at the stake. Nobody goes 50-50. It's 100% or nothing.
Yeah, well, and so it's interesting. I think that again, relationships are a lot like snowflakes, like they are all unique. And the
Right.
only thing that really matters is to what extent are the two people involved in a relationship?
Right.
To what extent are the expectations being made explicit? And to what extent are those expectations being met? Right. And so, as long as those two people are on the same page as to whatever those expectations are, and the extent to which many or most of them are being met, those are the only thing that matters. And so, again, now that looks different in every single relationship, right? It may be that in one house on the block, it may be that the man plays a traditional sort of a provider role, and the woman plays more of a traditional domestic homemaker role. It may be that next door there's more of a 50-50 sort of a split, whether it be a sort of a dual earner household. It may be that in the next house, you don't even have a man and a woman, you have a same-sex couple, right? And so again, we have to that we're being inclusive in the way in which we talk about these relationships, because again, they are indeed like snowflakes. They're completely unique in the way in which they are formed, in the way in which they are structured, in the way in which they tend to operate. So again, I think the one of the major points is, rather than looking to, whether it be TV, whether it be looking to film, whether it be looking to IG, whether it be looking to social media, look to your partner and have those types of discussions and conversations, and get some foundation and some grounding in what it is that you all have in terms of core values, because you can use those core values as essentially your North Star. So even when you don't see eye to eye, as long as you have some established core values, it gives you something to come back to and some common ground, so that you can say, well, although you may be saying this and I'm saying that, well, here's our core value. What would our core value say about our discrepancy or our disagreement in this particular regard? If I can say one other thing about the finance piece, if we're talking specifically about Black people, the idea of man as provider and woman or female in a heterosexual relationship as nurturer, caregiver, that model was never developed with us in mind, right? So if you look historically, Black women have always been involved in paid labor outside of the home. It was a necessity, right, from the standpoint of buffering ourselves, insulating ourselves against the negative impact of poverty and discrimination. Right. And so as a consequence of that, Black men have always been more involved in domestic labor as well, because there's that natural trade-off. So the idea that even in a contemporary context, we see people who are halting their relationships or having their relationships held up by issues related to finances, again, that can largely be a function of the broader society's model being superimposed on us. And so we need to do some education around that to make sure that people know and understand what the history tells them about their relationships and what the individual player's role is in those relationships, so that they aren't looking to live up to some ideal that was never meant for them, and resources and opportunities were never provided for them to be able to fit into that model anyway, right? With that said, the other thing I think that's important, and this is not a good or bad thing, I think it just is from a societal standpoint across race and ethnicity, but Black people are included in this too. One of the other differences is, in days gone by, it used to be that people saw marriage as the beginning of their lives together.
Yes.
Right? So you have two people who would get married, and then from that part, that would be the starting point, and then they would build their life together.
Yes.
Now it seems more likely the case that you have individuals who attempt to build their lives, and then they see marriage as the culmination.
Yes. And
so it's some version of, okay, well, I'm going to get myself together, whatever that means. Again, in the case that you said, Martin, he wanted to get out of the apartment or whatever, he wanted to get his credit together, you want to, you know, I mean, whatever those things are. And then
Right.
you have the other partner who's saying, okay, well, I'm going to do the same thing. And then the idea is, okay, well, once you get yourself together, whatever that means, and now I get myself together, then I'll meet you at the altar the next weekend. And so I'm not suggesting that that's either right, wrong, and different, because again, relationships are like snowflakes. So what's best is what works for you.
Right. And that is true. And that is true. I don't mean to cut you off, Doc, but it is true. But one of the pop culture quotes that, you know, they're using, you wasn't shooting with me in the gym.
Right. Yeah, I think it was that Drake, I think, right? Yeah, you wouldn't.
That was Drake. That was Drake.
Yeah. Well, and so I think that the potential flip side or downside of this more contemporary model of you get yourself together, I get myself together, and then we'll meet at the altar, is that there is no building together, right? And
Right.
so I think that creates a situation and facilitates a situation where we begin to see each other as competitors, as opposed to people who should be cooperating.
And that's a
And
big piece.
absolutely it is, because I think that it also plays itself out in terms of when the relationship begins to go sour. If I see you as my competitor as opposed to somebody that I'm building with and apart, I'm more likely to call it quits.
Right.
And I think we see that being played out in the demographic data around the prevalence of divorce and the extent to which people are waiting longer and longer to get married, if they ever get married at all. Whereas when we look to the old heads, we see them in 30, 40, 50-year relationships, because again, the mindset was different, right? They came together and then they built from there, as opposed to whatever the more contemporary model is.
I got you. But you also state in this article, I mean, I'm breaking down an article because we got about 20 minutes left. But you also broke down an article like, you know, the poor man decides to reject the monogamous relationship. You know, he doesn't, because he's not the breadwinner. So it's basically pop culture. The pop culture term is basically he's gonna play nice in the winter because he's gonna be homeless and he don't want to be out in the cold.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and and it's like I'm trying to find in the pop culture state, and it was like when summer hits, that's when when the first hot day hits, everybody acts out. Relationships are done.
Yeah, well, it's that way not only in pop culture, but it's also like that even in some of the academic research. Even in some of the academic research you pick up when you read, for some reason, there tends to be a preoccupation on the behavior of low-income men. And there's this notion, or there's this narrative that if and when men cannot fulfill that provider role, what they'll look to do is they'll look to seek out sort of alternative forms of masculinity by turning women into conquests, right? That's the way they feel that they've become or can be a man. And again, I'm not looking to be an apologist for brothers out here who may have some growing and some evolution to do, but the idea that is the sort of the master narrative around how it is that Black men engage relationships, that's simply not true. Right. And it's certainly not true in the research that I've done. The research that I've done suggests and indicates that Black men appreciate relationships. They want and desire intimacy in their relationships. They want companionship. They want partnership. They want to come together and build in the ways that we were describing. And if and when they don't, it's not because they didn't value those things or they didn't desire them. It's been because they've fallen victim to a system that says to them, here is how it's done, and there's only one way to do it. And if you fall short of that, then you indeed are a failure, as opposed to doing what I think has been the case for us in days and years gone by, which has been, not necessarily to reject the mainstream model, but to say, well, my situation doesn't fit that, so let me go an alternate route. Right. But again, as long as I'm taking that alternate route and I'm on the same page with my partner, we're keeping it a buck, you know?
Yeah. No, you good. You can keep talking.
Yeah. No. So again, I think those are the things for us to keep into consideration again, as opposed to, and this is the theme for the day, right? As opposed to look into whether it be mainstream media, whether it be celebrity culture, whether it be, honestly, even public policy, right? We know that public policy has not been the friend of Black people and Black families and Black relationships as well.
Hey, Dr. Perry, don't get me started.
Yeah, sure. I know.
Don't get me started, man.
And
Don't get
so,
me started about that.
and so from a historical standpoint, up even in a contemporary context, we know that public policy has played a major role in dividing and decimating Black families, and as a consequence, Black communities, to the
Yeah, the
point where,
Welfare
yeah,
Reform Act
yeah,
before Bill Clinton got in offense. Yes, welfare
absolutely,
reform.
absolutely, yeah. So you talk about the Personal Responsibility, Work Opportunity, Reconciliation Act of 1996, right? I think
Yes.
Public Law 104-93. I think my first job out of graduate school was in the U.S. House of Representatives, and so when we talk public policy, we have to. When we talk relationships, when we talk family, we talk community, we have to have discussions related to policy, because
Right.
these are literally the laws that govern our society, and we see over and over again, whether it be public assistance laws, whether it be criminal justice laws, whether it be housing laws, whether it be economic policy, macroeconomic policy. We were just talking about the sort of the preoccupation with men being providers. Well, we also know that goods producing and manufacturing work has largely been outsourced to other countries here in the United States, away from the United States to other parts of the world, and we know that that's disproportionately hit Black and African Americans in large central cities in the Midwest and the Northeast, has hit those places really, really hard. Well, they now are suffering what we call the Rust Belt, right?
Yes. Yes.
Places like Gary, Indiana, places like obviously New York and Baltimore and Philadelphia, places they used to Detroit, right? Places they
Right.
used to be
Don't
thriving.
forget St. Louis
Yeah. Shout out to the Lou, right?
and New Orleans. New Orleans.
Yeah, absolutely. Places that used to be destinations, again, particularly in the
Right.
Midwest and the Northeast, when we think about the 1940s and the Great Migration, we now see, as a consequence of macroeconomic policy and goods producing manufacturing work going overseas, we see that then led to the rise in basically the Black ghetto, right? Or what scholars like William Julius Wilson would call the Black underclass. Because what happened was post civil rights, the people who lived in the central cities who had the requisite education and income to leave, they did, leaving behind only those who was essentially trapped, right? And so again,
Right.
so just like T.I. said, when he named it trap music, he was being specific, right? And so like that's not just sort of flowery language, that's indeed a double entendre in terms of the language that he used to describe the community. And again, we owe some of that to the federal government as well as state and local governments that made decisions willfully and intentionally that put our people at a disadvantage. And we still see some of the influence and impact of that today. I mentioned being a college professor. We also know that we see more Black women in college than we do Black men. And what does that mean for the health of our communities and our relationships, particularly against the backdrop of some of the trepidation and concern and reluctance of on the part of Black men to enter into relationships, given the financial piece that we were just talking about. So again, so we see some of these things being played out and right in front of our very eyes, and they can become really, really clear examples and explanations for why it is we see some of the challenges in relationships among and with Black people. And so we know what's going on. The key, I think, in terms of getting things turned around is making sure that we spread the word so that people have a clearer sense of what's happening and that they have access to good information, solid information, things like the things that we're discussing today, rather than reliance on people who may or may not have their best interests at heart, but certainly wouldn't mind exploiting them for commercial gain, right?
True. That is definitely. But in your article, what I definitely picked up, I mean, it was a lot of. I mean, we spoke about a lot of, a lot of missed things about the Black man. But in the middle of your article, a lot of the Black men stated one, and I quote what you said. With one of the men stated, he met a woman, and this is come through the middle of your article, the meat of your article, when they met Black women that stated she wasn't phony. She was comfortable being herself. She wasn't trying to impress anybody. She made me learn to be comfortable by being myself. So what I'm seeing in the meat of your article is like, as an African American man, meeting a woman basically brings another level to us. Like, you become the man that you thought you wanted to be. You become the man that you are supposed to be. She brings it out of you. What I've got from the meat of your article, because a lot of these the excerpts from the article, the guys are saying about the women that they met. These women brought it out of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, and I think that speaks to the power of these relationships. If nothing else, it speaks to the men's interest and desire in relationships and companions and companionship and intimacy, because time and time again, what the guys told us was that they saw themselves that they became better men, they became better partners, they became better fathers as a result of.
Hold on, Dr. Perry. One of my viewers, I'm sorry, you asked the question. These are not all poor men. He interviewed the income ranges were from 0 to 175,000. Let's keep it 100. 0 to 175,000. They had GEDs, high school diplomas, undergrads, and graduate. Okay, now you can talk. Now you finish, brother.
That's a really, really important point, because again, as we were just talking about, what we see in the academic literature is we see a preoccupation on low-income Black men. And so to try to balance out that discussion, we were intentional about seeking out men who represented a range of, whether it be income statuses, relationship statuses, education statuses, age statuses, religiosity, so on and so forth. So we were looking to survey and interview men who span a cross section of the Black experience, right? So again, as you mentioned, we had guys who went everywhere from being unemployed to guys who were making 175,000, guys who didn't have a GED, all the way to guys who had professional degrees, graduate degrees. We had people who had no children, all the way to guys who had up to 10 children. So again, I mean, everywhere in between. I should also mention too that the article that we mentioned is based on a book that I wrote that was recently published, called Black Loves Matters: Authentic Men's Perspectives on Marriage and Relationships. And so, yeah. So again, so we were looking to be intentional about engaging Black men from across the socioeconomic, age, relationship, marital status, so that again we could get a breadth of perspectives from authentic Black men. I forgot your question though when I got sidetracked.
No, that's fine. No, that's fine. You can forget my question, because I want to play a game. If anybody comes on the show, they got to play a game. And
Okay.
the game always relays of what we talk about. I know we didn't finish the whole article. I know we didn't. I know we didn't finish the article because we pressed for time. Is another show that comes on after this on the same network. So I'm going to throw out some. I'm going to throw out some names. Huh?
That just means you got to bring me back, right? Is that what that means?
Hey, listen. This is my house, Dr. Perry. But you always welcome, man.
All right.
Listen, I read a lot of your articles, but this one stuck out. I mean, I just looked at it and said, hold on, this brother is dropping some knowledge, for the Black family. I mean, I wasn't raised with I wasn't raised in the perfect household. I wasn't.
Let me stop.
I saw my dad. Before you start.
Okay.
My dad came and got me whenever I called him. My dad was in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So no disrespect to my dad if he's watching, because I know he's probably watching. But no disrespect to my dad. But my dad and my mom, they did what they did and they split. But he was there for me whenever I needed him. He showed me things that I needed to be shown and all of that. I wasn't raised in that two-person home. But they had a mutual understanding, like you said earlier when we first started, co-parenting. And being them as old as they are now, they have the best of friendship in the world. But I wasn't raising it. So if I needed something, it call your dad. He there. Sometimes I didn't have to call him. He was already there.
There you go. Yeah. So again, I was just gonna push back against the idea that a married two-parent house is perfect. No. A situation where you have two people, if there are kids involved, a situation where you have two people who are willing to put their own interests aside for the best interest of their children, that's what you need. Now, if those people happen to be married, sweet. If not, well, we can still keep it moving and still get a good outcome, right?
Right.
the key is to what extent are those people willing to be cooperative as opposed to competitors and put their own interests aside for what's in the best interest of the children. That's what's key. Let's get to the
Okay.
game. I'm here for the game.
Okay, let's get to the game then. Because we know we talked about TV and you talked about things that saw on TV. So I'm going to throw some names out and you tell me how you feel that relates to the Black relationship. First, I'm going to go Philip Banks.
Oh yeah, Uncle Phil. Uncle Phil was a boss, right? He was. Here's when I think Philip Banks. Here's what I think. Remember the episode where Will's dad didn't come to get him?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Philip Banks, in that moment, he allowed Will to be vulnerable. He allowed Will to be a whole human being. He allowed Will to be angry. He allowed him to be sad. He allowed him to be furious. He allowed him to be a whole human being. He had Will, and he allowed Will to put aside the idea of a cool pose, and he was able to be an authentic person. And if you remember the end of the episode, they hugged and they embraced. It was a beautiful thing.
Right. Okay. That's what you got for Uncle Phil.
Absolutely. I can hear you.
Michael Kyle.
Michael Kyle. What do I know Michael Kyle?
Damon Wayans, My Wife and Children.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay. So he's a little bit different. He was a little bit of a prankster. He gave Junior a hard time. But he gave Junior a hard time, because I think he wanted the best for Junior. And so when I think about My Wife and Kids, I think about him giving his son a really, really hard time, too hard of a time, I think, at times, but he was doing it from a place of love. So I'm cool with him too.
Okay. Carl Winslow.
Carl Winslow. Oh man, yeah. Carl was cool too. He was a cop. I don't know how I feel about that. But can I say that? Yeah, no, Carl Winslow was cool. Look, Carl took care of his family. Carl was a fixture in the family. He was a fixture in the community. I was mostly joking about the police officer thing. We actually need more brothers as police to do community policing, I think. And I think in a lot of ways, Carl was maybe an example of that and the epitome of that. So I'm cool with Carl Winslow as well.
Now I'm going to take you to a single dad.
All right.
In the episode, Malik Yoba in New York Undercover. They was co-parenting more than anything.
So here's the thing, and this didn't have anything to do with anything. Why couldn't they get Malik Yoba some Vaseline or some Carmex or something like that? I know it was set like in the Northeast and it was cold outside in the wintertime, but the brother had donuts. He had like a glazed donut sort of situation every time we saw him. It's like, man, like
New York City, man. It's New York City.
But I'm or some Crisco or something, you know what I mean? Get a situation right. No, you know what? To me, here's what I think about that. If you ask me, my favorite movie without question is New Jack City, right?
Okay, New Jack City.
So when I think about sort of the TV version of New Jack City, Malik Yoba and the crew from that show, I think
New York Undercover.
Those are the cats who come to mind, right? And the other thing that I liked about him is, again, from a fatherhood standpoint, was that, again, he did what he had to do. He was able to manage and balance, right, in terms of the family piece and the work and the career piece. And I appreciated the producers and the writers of the shows for not only just emphasizing sort of the action pieces and the cops and robbers pieces, but you also got to see a little bit of the depth of the characters, because you got to see them when they were off duty and what they were wrestling with and what they were dealing with on the home front. So that was cool, and I appreciate that too. Anytime we can get our people in front of the screen and we're being portrayed in positive lights, in ways that show and emphasize our interest and our dedication, our commitment to the family, I'm all on board for that. Even if it means we got to do it with ashy lips.
All right. So I got two more before we go. Okay. James Evans.
Oh, the king. Yeah, I don't know who you have after James Evans, but he's going to be hard pressed to follow James Evans. No, James Evans was the boss of all bosses. You're talking about when he was E.F. Hutton, right? When he spoke, you know what I mean? Um, you talk about here's the thing with James Evans, right? So take a step back, right? We're talking about in the projects of Chicago, right? It could have
Yes,
been like
we are. We talking about Southside Chicago. We
yeah,
talking about
like
Southside
maybe like
Chicago.
Cabrini Green or whatever the case may be, right? So we're talking about places where this it's real out there.
Yeah, it's real in Chicago.
James Evans regularly stood up and stood down the hardest of the hard,
Right.
right? And they knew whatever this foolishness is you got going on outside, you will not bring that to James Evans' apartment. Absolutely
Right.
not. And he was universally respected.
Yes,
He
he
was
was.
universally respected, right? And so because of the presence that he had, because of the stability that he exemplified, because of the role that he played in his kids and his family's lives, James Evans, the boss of all bosses, and he
Got
didn't.
you.
Very clear, he didn't play. Right, he was.
Uh,
Yeah, whatever needed to be done, he was gonna get it done. Absolutely.
well, I gotta bring the best TV dad. They always say, gotta bring Cliff Huxtable up.
So okay, so the first thing we got to do is we if we talking to the family, we have to cook out, right? We got to separate Heathcliff Huxtable
Right?
from Bill Cosby.
We
We
got to.
we got to separate the two, right?
Gotta separate them. Gotta separate them.
If we're talking Heathcliff Huxtable, he may even have the drop on James Evans because James Evans he was a blue collar cat and he was a hardcore cat, but he loved his family though, and he had no qualms about expressing that. But I think when you think about the epitome of being able to balance and reconcile being firm but being supportive, you got to give it up to Heathcliff Huxtable. You talk about the ability to get with his kids and put them in line, but also be there to nurture them and support them through the ups and the downs. When you look at the growth and the evolution of the Cosby kids, right? Like Theo was a knucklehead. He graduated from NYU though, right?
Right.
And then you had Sandra and Elvin, and they went to Princeton and Harvard, and they ended up in the Wilderness Store. You know what I mean? So it was, yeah, like it was. No, Heathcliff Huxtable. Again, if if James Evans is the boss of all bosses, then I think that Heathcliff Huxtable, he's the GOAT. Heathcliff and even Bill Cosby. Let me because Bill Cosby as the man, he's a complicated person as we all are, and Bill
We
Cosby
are.
he has some major issues and some challenges. He's been at least convicted of some heinous stuff that none of us, I don't think, can or should
Well,
condone.
the statute of limitation was already done. I don't know why, but I'm not here to speak on that. He tried to buy NBC. That's not my
Right.
stature.
Yeah. Well,
That's not me.
we know that the system will do our people in. If he
Hmm.
was convicted of what he was convicted of, that's heinous. But it's also
Right.
true that we cannot. That does not diminish all of the good that he did for the community.
Yes,
So
it is.
I think the key when we're talking Bill Cosby is which conjunction are you using? You shouldn't use but because
Right.
again, you got to tell this whole story. The
Right.
conjunction is and right.
Yes,
The
it
conjunction
is.
right? But again, if we're talking Heathcliff Huxtable, no, he's above reproach. The perfect mix and blend of being firm when he needed, but being loving and supportive when he had to. And his relationship with his wife, you talk about setting a role model, setting a model for not only his family but the community. Listen, Felicia Rashad, Claire Huxtable,
Mm.
come on, yeah.
Well, I mean that was the game I had for you, but you definitely are. I mean, listen, we're gonna definitely keep in contact because I am definitely in December. Lord willing, will reach that 5% that you are, my brother. Already, that 5% of African American with PhDs.
There you go.
I will reach that pinnacle, and I'm definitely going to send you an invite, just for doing this show right here for me. But one of my viewers, and I really don't want to ask you this. One of my viewers asked you this. They said, "Are you single, and where are your single PhD friends at?"
No, so I got the whole. Yeah, no, I'm married.
They didn't see that.
No, I'm off the market. Have been. I've been married for 12. It'll be 13 years in May. Where so, but the other question: where are the single PhDs? I actually have an answer for this. You ready for this?
I'm ready. They ready for you.
SREB.org, the Southern Regional Education Board. This is an organization that funds scholars of color who are working on dissertations. And if you go to their conference, now it's not a matchmaking conference, it's right, but if you're looking for single PhDs, Southern Region Educational Board, SREB.org, you're gonna find thousands of scholars of color who most of them are young professionals getting ready to wrap up their PhD. So if you're looking for a place to shoot your shot, there it is, SREB.org.
Oh man, Dr. Perry is definitely down. We gotta bring. Hey, Dr. Perry, they said I gotta bring you back.
Hey, listen, anytime,
I'm definitely gonna bring you back.
I'll be there.
I got you. I got your info. I definitely gotta bring you back, and I'm definitely following you to make sure once I see one of these another articles come out that need to come out, that need to be on Amsterdam Talk, you're definitely welcome. This is my house, but you're always welcome.
My man, I appreciate you, Rod.
Hey, listen, check it. I'm gonna meet you at one of these black caucuses eventually, somewhere, and we're gonna discuss this public DPA. What you had? What's your PhD in?
So mine is in social work, but a good friend of mine is getting ready to be the chair of the public administration graduate program here at the University of Louisville. You hit me up, I'll give you his contact information.
Okay, yeah, we definitely going to talk. But man, if one thing I got against Louisville, because I'm a ride and die Kentucky Wildcat fan, that's the only piece I got against y'all.
So like I'm from Alabama, so I don't feel conflicted in that way. And again, like where I'm from, football is king, and basketball is just sort of what you do until football season rolls back around.
Oh so, no, I'm from Baltimore City. We play basketball all day.
Well, yeah. So I used to live in Northwest DC, so I know how they do it in B-more. So here's the thing: football is king for me, so I don't feel conflicted about rooting for Kentucky because I'm an SEC cat. But I work at the University of Louisville, so I can roll with them too, right? Because again, on the hoop side, they go back and forth.
I understand. They beat us this year. I understand. But you got your title last night. Roll Tide. I'll give you that. You got your title from me in September. Alabama State Hornets. My fans, he is definitely an HBCU alum. Absolutely. ASU. And they will be proud. They'll be proud of me for bringing you on. They are the Family Feud champs, and we're gonna play this game again.
I got to get on the Family Feud though, right? Like how do I get the invite to the Family Feud? Like that's
man. Hey, Dr. Perry, we friends now. We're gonna talk about it.
My man.
We're gonna talk. We're gonna definitely talk. We done made friends. I'll see you at one of them black caucuses in a few. But other than that, you got my info. I got your info. And we definitely gonna link up and talk about some more of this black love and public policy. But other than that, this is Amsterdam Talk. I'm Rod. Thank you for coming, Dr. Perry, Dr. Armon Perry. Thank you for coming.
Absolutely. Appreciate you.
Stay tuned. We got the Locker Room Chronicles coming up in 30 seconds. I'll holler at you.